What's going on, guys? Welcome back. Formula One is back. This time out, it is the 2025 Singapore Grand Prix. As we left Azerbaijan a couple of weeks ago, we left with a lot of questions, specifically around our current world drivers leaders, as well as Max Verstappen. It's about time we get those answers, but it all kicks off right here, right now, with our predictions for the 2025 Singapore Grand Prix. We're going to be talking our biggest positive surprise, our biggest disappointments, our qualifying top three, our race podium, and once and for all, our one crazy prediction right at the end to wrap things up. Let's go ahead, without further ado, jump on into this thing and get started with our biggest positive surprise. Alright, I'm not gonna lie, I really don't feel well, so this is probably going to be an extra quick predictions video, but as always, if you're interested in jumping into our community predictions championship, you can always do so. Head to the link down below, join the Discord, and every weekend leading up to a Grand Prix week, I'll make a call for these exact same predictions. You can drop the predictions in the predictions channel and have your voice heard and see if you can cook up predictions better than anyone else. But without further ado, let's quickly run through our pick for biggest positive surprise. And this time out, I'm going with Oscar Piastri. And I know what you're saying, Dakota, that is the obvious pick. Obviously, it's hard to go literally any lower than the Azerbaijan Grand Prix weekend for Oscar Piastri. But I will counter that point by saying that after scoring 0 points, literally 0 points in my predictions for Azerbaijan, I got to take an early win here. I think it goes basically without saying that Oscar would be hard-pressed to find a weekend worse than the last time out here for him, where he obviously crashed in qualifying, jumped at the start, crashed on lap 1, and was basically just mentally checked out before the first lap of the race was over. And so going now into Singapore, now wanting to regroup, refocus, a track that McLaren has, well, at least last year, performed very strongly at. I think we're going to want to see, obviously, Oscar bounce back in a big way. I think we're going to see that. He'll end up back on the podium like we always are used to seeing him. We'll have a clean weekend, and I think we'll obviously walk away taking an easy point, and we will not complain whatsoever. Alright, let's move on ahead to our pick for biggest disappointment, and this time out, I'm going with a Red Bull, but it is going to be Yuki Tsunoda this time. Obviously, Yuki is coming off of one of his, if not his best results after his switch to the main Red Bull team. He obviously finished well inside the top 10, had some decent pace, and while yes, Max did end up winning the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, it's the best result position-wise that we've seen Yuki finish, and so I feel like it's only natural when you kind of look at the dichotomy of the two tracks, with Baku being obviously very technical still, but obviously being much more straight line speed focused, going to Singapore, which is going to be extremely downforce dependent. And while we can trust Max to really get the most out of a car that's set up like the Red Bull is, I don't know if Yuki is going to have the same success. And it's one of those instances where all it takes is one small moment and it's just going to be game over for Yuki. And so I think we might see him take a bit of a step back, try and really make sure to have a nice clean weekend and try and continue to march forward. Of course, we also run the risk of him pushing even just a little too hard and having a bit of an incident that leads him to finishing well outside of Max and well off the pace as well. So it'll be interesting to see. I think this is another one where I definitely wouldn't be, shocked to see a lot of drivers struggle around Singapore. And I think it feels pretty obvious, like a spot where Yuki will take a bit of a step back after his strong performance in Azerbaijan. Alright, let's quickly move along to our qualifying top three. A very important qualifying around Singapore. This is another one of those tracks where all too often we'll see one driver make a bit of a mistake and ruin laps, like we saw not but a couple of weeks ago around Azerbaijan. So I guess all in all, they might not be as different as I came to believe myself, but time will tell. We've seen crazier things happen in Singapore. We've seen some really, really, really good laps put down in Singapore, and I think we're going to see it done again. Let's go ahead and begin my qualifying predictions with my P3 pick, and I am going for Oscar Piastri in this one. And while I do expect Oscar to be well on the pace, I think Singapore, at least in terms of one lap pace, hasn't necessarily been Oscar's strong suit. Last time out, he qualified pretty far down the order in Q3, ultimately ended up finishing on the podium, and I think this year the car definitely, I think, will give him the advantage to qualify much better. But unless and until we see Oscar really put down a good qualifying lap, especially coming off of Azerbaijan. I know I spent a lot of time watching, talking about him bouncing back and having this fantastic weekend. I think it starts in a qualifying in P3. I think it'll be a good result for him, kind of keeping, the front of the, the sharp end of the grid all to himself. And it's going to be interesting to see the kind of performance that he puts in, to see if he kind of takes it a little easy. Maybe just trying to continue, to ensure that he has a nice clean weekend. Singapore obviously presents a lot of different challenges to circuits like Baku, and so it's going to be very interesting to see. So there, we'll start to kick things off in P3, Oscar Piastri, as we move on now to P2 in my qualifying predictions, and I am going for Max Verstappen. This is a result of my post-Azerbaijan revelations in the Discord that says I am done doubting Max Verstappen, especially as Red Bull now seem to have gained more of a grasp on what this package is for Max specifically. And we'll get to find out if the back-to-back of, the Italian Grand Prix and Azerbaijan Grand Prix was a bit of a two-off, and if they kind of regress back to the mean a little bit. We've seen other teams be very strong around Singapore. Or is Red Bull finally getting their act together under new team principal Laura Mekies and kind of really challenging towards the front again? Time will tell, and I think a front row start for Max Verstappen would bode for a pretty exciting beginning to the Singapore Grand Prix ahead. But that leaves only one position left, pole position for the Singapore Grand Prix, and I am going with Lando Norris in this one. Lando took pole last season, and I think it's one of those instances where him being embedded and having the experience in Singapore really, came to benefit him a lot. Tagging that along with, I'm sure he'll also be itching and raring to try and make up for what we lacked in Azerbaijan. And so I think it'll start on the Saturday with a fantastic pole position lap, and it's all really going to come down to, can he get the job done when it matters most? I mean, realistically, we don't have as many race weekends left before the end of the season as we would hope, and it's going to come down to, does he have what it takes to truly put it in position for challenging for the championship? It's going to get interesting. It's going to make for an interesting grid. I'm sure having a Max Lando front row start in Singapore would be a fascinating revelation, especially with Oscar Piastri lurking just behind. But there we have it, guys. My qualifying predictions: Oscar Piastri P3, Max Verstappen P2, and Lando Norris on pole position. All right, the thing we come to see most often in Formula One, the Grand Prix results, the Grand Prix podium. What is going to happen? Who is going to stand atop the 3 podium steps and leave us all asking even more questions than we had leaving Baku? I think it's going to be a very fascinating race. Singapore presents a lot of very interesting situations. I'm going to cover this a little bit more, but the Singapore Grand Prix history has been fascinating to look into this week leading up to this video. And I, for one, cannot wait to see what happens this weekend. It's all going to be about who can get the strategy right at the right time and who's going to make those decisive decisions when it matters most. There's been little inklings and sprinklings of potential rain over the weekend, so that's going to add a bit of a wrinkle as well. So it's going to get very, very interesting to say the least. But without further ado, let's go ahead and jump on into my podium predictions. Let's begin in P3, and I'm going with Oscar Piastri in this one. I think this weekend could potentially turn out to be a bit of a damage limitation weekend for Oscar, obviously coming off of the ever so mentioned Azerbaijan Grand Prix in this video. I think this could be a situation where, depending on how the race pans out, this could be an instance of Oscar just trying to secure the most points that he could. In the instance, obviously Singapore isn't necessarily a track you go to really attack and really try and attack for positions and points. You kind of hopefully get into a good position and hold on until the end. And so I think this will be one of those instances where, should the race get away as you would expect it to, we could see Oscar just kind of holding serve in P3, especially if the start does go well and Lando gets pit stop preference. I think Oscar is just going to be fighting for, basically probably holding in position, probably fighting for a P2 potentially, if that were the way to go. So my official prediction, Oscar Piastri back on the podium once again. As we move on now to P2, I'm going with Max Verstappen in this one, although I debated on this one in my head a lot, because it is going to get very interesting, especially if it is a little wet. If they have to bring out the inters or even the wets in this one with some potential rain in Singapore over the weekend, I think it could get very dicey and really increases Max's odds. But at the same time, I think this is an instance of Singapore obviously being very track position dominant, and I think should a straightforward race happen, I think this was probably the order that it would end up, unless obviously Red Bull really just knock it out of the park with setup. You never know, and Max has done special things in qualifying before, so he could even just throw me off from the jump. But I think a good safe bet is putting Max smack dab in the middle of the podium, and I think I feel pretty confident in saying that. As we move on now to the winner of the Singapore Grand Prix, none other than Lando Norris. Now, these predictions, I'm trying to write a bit of a safe line, obviously coming off of an Azerbaijan Grand Prix, which was anything but safe. I think I'm trying to imagine the fact that we'll probably see a bit of a reduction to the means here. I think Azerbaijan gave us the excitement, you know, Carlos Sainz podium, him qualifying on the front row, Liam Lawson qualifying P3. I think we see a bit of a return to the mean, and I think we'll see a bit of a expected weekend. I would be shocked if, you know, we got anything too crazy, but at the same time, it's Formula One. I showed last week that you really never know what's going to happen. And so I think for this one, we're going to stick to our guns, and we're gonna roll with our same order as we did for qualifying and put it on the podium. But who really knows? That's why we show up to watch every week. But there you have it, guys. My race podium predictions: an Oscar Piastri P3, Max Verstappen P2, and a Lando Norris winner. All right, let's wrap things up with my one crazy prediction. And I touched on this briefly, but we're going to be talking about Singapore Grand Prix history being made this weekend, because I went back in the history of the Singapore Grand Prix. And I couldn't believe this, because I thought of this as a prediction, and I had to go and double check. And my one crazy prediction is that all 20 cars will finish the Singapore Grand Prix for the first time in F1 history. I went back to every single Singapore Grand Prix all the way back until 2008. And every single year, there has been at least one DNF in every single Singapore Grand Prix since its inception. I think this could be the year we buck that trend a little bit. I think everyone hopefully got all of their insanity out in Baku, and especially if the weather is a little bit mixed, I think we could see drivers potentially taking it easy. That may not actually help me out the most. I kind of would probably be hoping for a bit of a drier, more straightforward weekend if this is going to be my prediction. But you know what? Crazier things have happened. I think we're all going to be watching the grid eagerly to see what happens at the front in terms of the Drivers' Championship. But all in all, I think we could see a bit of a return to some boring F1 weekends. Or not boring, very straightforward, very run-of-the-mill. But at the same time, my one crazy prediction is nothing if not crazy, because I'm going for F1 history, and it's almost about 15-year history on the calendar, so who knows. But there it is, guys, my one crazy prediction: every single car finishes the Singapore Grand Prix. And guys, there we have it, my predictions for the 2025 Singapore Grand Prix. Thank you so much for making it this far into the video. If you have, subscribe down below. We'd love to have you join our small little community we're building here, as well as leave a like on the video. It really helps me out. And as always, leave your predictions for what you think is going to happen this weekend in Singapore down in the comment section below. I'm going to go now get some rest. I hope you're ready for the race weekend. I know I am. It's going to be extremely fun. Singapore is one of those weekends that just, you never know what you're going to get until it gets there. So I, for one, can't wait till we get there.